On June 28, 1941, Spain's dictator Francisco Franco, who had won his own civil war against Soviet-backed forces just 2 years earlier, made a bold announcement. Spain would send volunteers to join Hitler's invasion of Russia. The response was overwhelming. Within hours, recruiting offices across Spain were flooded. Civilians and military men alike rushed to enlist. Army officers even begged to serve as privates, just for the chance to join. Historian Gerald R. Kleinfeld noted, "For many of the young Spaniards who volunteered, it was a crusade against communism. Now, facing their old enemy in the frozen wastelands of Russia, the Blue Division endured bone-shattering temperatures of minus 56 degrees Celsius at Lake Ilmen, where 543 German soldiers were trapped behind Soviet lines. The very force the Germans had once dismissed as undisciplined and useless became their only hope of survival." Spain's foreign minister, Ramon Serrano Sr., Franco's brother-in-law and leader of the fascist Falange Party, advocated for Spain to fully join Hitler's war. He envisioned a Spanish-German alliance to crush communism and seize Gibraltar from Britain. But Franco understood the risks. Though he shared their hatred of communism, Spain was still reeling from its own civil war. At Hendaye in October 1940, Franco met Hitler and revealed his strategy. When Hitler demanded Spain join the Axis, Franco countered with impossible conditions: massive economic aid and sweeping territorial gains in North Africa. The 9-hour meeting frustrated Hitler so much that he later remarked, "I'd rather have 3 or 4 teeth pulled than negotiate with Franco again." Still, Franco couldn't afford to openly defy the Führer. The pro-Nazi faction in his government was growing restless, and Hitler's influence loomed large over Europe. So in 1941, Franco offered a dangerous compromise: the Division Azul, the Blue Division. Over 47,000 Spanish volunteers marched east to fight the Soviets. It was Franco's way to appease the Axis while keeping Spain out of a war it couldn't afford to fight or lose. The response to Franco's announcement was electric. Recruiting offices were overwhelmed within hours, swarming with young men eager to fight communism. Entire cadet corps from Spain's military academies, Spain's equivalent of West Point, stepped forward en masse. At the University of Madrid, 3,000 students abandoned their studies for the battlefield. The rallying cry of the volunteers was, "We pay the Russians a return visit." Their uniforms reflected Spain's fractured yet fervent past. The blue shirts of the Phalangists, the red berets of the Carlists, the khaki trousers of the Foreign Legion, and the black boots of the Goripas. On July 4, 1941, just weeks after Hitler launched Operation Barbarossa, the Blue Division officially formed. Its ranks quickly swelled to 18,000 officers and soldiers, a mix of regular army professionals and fanatical Phalangist militia. Over the course of the war, that number would climb to 40,000. 3 weeks into the German invasion, 19 trains carrying 17,924 volunteers departed Madrid, cheered on by massive crowds. Their commander, General Muñoz Grandes, flew ahead in a Lufthansa Focke-Wulf Condor 200, arriving in Germany days before his men would face their first test of loyalty. Upon arrival, the Blue Division soldiers were required to swear an oath of allegiance to Hitler. The officer asked, "Do you swear before God and on your honor as Spaniards absolute obedience to the Supreme Commander of the German Army, Adolf Hitler, in the fight against communism, and do you swear to fight as valiant soldiers, ready at any time to sacrifice your lives in fulfillment of this oath?" With their right arms raised in a fascist salute, the soldiers shouted, "Yes, I swear!" By autumn 1941, the Blue Division's path to glory took an unexpected turn. Initially slated for the Moscow offensive with Army Group Center, they were redirected north to support the siege of Leningrad. Their arrival quickly shattered German expectations. Officers expressed immediate disdain for the Spaniards. One historian noted, an undisciplined bunch of macho men who refuse to practice drills, march in formation, salute, wear military uniforms, or obey orders. Their main activity in Russia seemed to be chasing local women and having a good time. The Spaniards' open fraternization with Russian women, including those from Jewish communities, horrified their German commanders. Field Marshal Hans Günther von Kluge, observing their behavior, was particularly disturbed. One German officer reportedly asked, "Are they soldiers or gypsies?" Their defiance peaked when they openly mocked German military protocol, marching past officers with inflated condoms fixed to their rifle barrels. The scene was so absurd that Russian intelligence allegedly mistook the display for experimental chemical warfare equipment. Despite their irreverent behavior, the Blue Division's journey to the front became a brutal testament to their endurance. From August 29th to October 9th, 1941, they marched nearly 625 miles from Suwałki, Poland, to Vitebsk, Russia, a 45-day ordeal that became the longest sustained march of World War II. The column stretched over 20 miles long, with each man carrying 70 pounds of equipment across treacherous terrain. Within 24 hours of reaching the front, they were thrust into combat. On October 12, 1941, their first attack brought an immediate victory. 2 days later, they captured Dubrovka, 100 miles southwest of Moscow. Their intense and unrelenting fighting style led one German general to remark, "The Russians must have stolen their wives." By early 1942, the brutal Russian winter pushed even the toughest soldiers to their limits. On January 21st, the Spaniards suffered their first major disaster. An 800-man Blue Division battalion was nearly wiped out in a surprise Soviet assault. Only 42 men survived. A month later, the Red Army launched a massive offensive aiming to sever the Axis front line. The Spaniards, caught in a blizzard, faced utter annihilation. Salvation arrived just in time with a desperate counterattack by German, Walloon, and Latvian reinforcements. As the Soviets retreated, the Spanish mockingly shouted, "Otro toro! Otro toro! Another bull! Another bull!" A bullfighter's taunt used here to ridicule the enemy's retreat. Their courage and resilience soon earned them the respect of the Germans and the fear of the Soviets. In February 1943, the Blue Division faced one of its most heroic challenges, rescuing 543 Germans trapped south of Lake Ilmen. The Spanish ski company launched a daring mission through minus 56 degrees Celsius temperatures, waist-deep snow, and relentless Soviet resistance. Of the 206 men who set out, only 12 returned unharmed. A staggering 95% casualty rate to save soldiers who had once scorned them. Later, in August 1942, the Blue Legion was redeployed to the southeastern flank of the Leningrad siege, taking up positions near the Neva and Izhora rivers close to Pushkin. There, they endured unrelenting Soviet pressure as the German southern front began to collapse. The critical moment came during the Battle of Krasny Bor in February 1943. The 55th Soviet Army launched a massive assault against Spanish positions along the Moscow-Leningrad road. Outnumbered 7-1, the Spaniards held the line, extending the siege of Leningrad by an entire year. The victory was costly. Franco, now under growing international pressure, was forced to replace the fallen with conscripts rather than volunteers. By summer 1943, the battered remnants of the Blue Division were folded into elite German units such as the Waffen-SS Panzergrenadier Division Nordland and the Storm Brigade Wallonian. Even as the Wehrmacht retreated, the Spaniards continued to fight with grim determination, as if they still believed they could win the war. But the geopolitical winds had shifted. In 1943, the Allies increased diplomatic pressure on Spain. Threats of oil and food embargoes became very real after the successful Allied invasion of North Africa. The U.S. ambassador warned Franco directly. What would happen if Russia declared war on Spain? Russia is an ally of the United States and Britain. Faced with growing danger, Franco began to pivot. He dismissed Serrano Sr., purged pro-Nazi officials from his government, and recalled General Muñoz Grandes. Though welcomed home as a national hero and showered with medals, the general was soon quietly sidelined. On September 25, 1943, Franco officially ordered the Blue Division's withdrawal, reaffirming Spain's neutrality. The soldiers who had departed to great fanfare returned in solemn silence. Yet, 2,133 Spaniards refused to abandon the Eastern Front. They fought on until March 21, 1944. Of these, 250 joined the Waffen-SS, eventually making their final stand in Berlin's Reich Chancellery during the closing days of the war in 1945.